The wind howled across the frozen plain, carrying sharp grains of ice that cut across the skin like tiny blades. Aron pulled his thick coat tighter around his body and lowered his head against the storm. His boots sank deep into the snow with every step, but he pressed forward with steady determination. This world was harsh, but he had no choice. His ship had been damaged during descent, and until he found shelter or a way to repair it, survival meant moving. The sky above was heavy with gray clouds, and the light of the distant sun could barely pierce through. The endless white stretched in all directions, broken only by dark shapes of rocks jutting out from the ice. Aron's breath came out in thick clouds of steam, each exhale a reminder that the temperature here was far below what most humans could endure for long. Still, he marched on. Humans were stubborn, and he was no different. As he climbed over a rise, his eyes caught something unusual ahead. At first, he thought it was just another patch of snow shaped by the wind, but then he noticed the faint movement. Two figures lay half buried in the snow, their bodies curled and trembling. Aron's heart quickened. They were not human. Their forms were slimmer, their features unfamiliar, and their skin had a faint shimmer even under the gray sky. They were clearly alive but barely. He hurried toward them, ignoring the cold sting on his face. When he reached them, he knelt down and brushed the snow from their faces. Their eyes fluttered open weakly, revealing a strange glow within their irises. They were alien women, though their forms carried enough similarity to humans that he could see expressions of fear and exhaustion written clearly across their faces. They were freezing to death. Aron did not waste time. He pulled his emergency thermal blanket from his pack and wrapped it around the first one, then the second. They were so cold that he could feel the chill through his gloves. He tried to speak, but they responded only with faint sounds in a language he did not recognize. Their voices were soft and weak, as though every word cost them precious strength. Gesturing toward his own chest, he spoke slowly. "Human. Aron." They blinked at him, clearly not understanding the word but sensing his intent. They made faint sounds back, but the storm drowned out most of it. He realized communication would have to wait. Survival came first. Aron slid his arms beneath their light frames and lifted them one by one. They were lighter than expected, perhaps due to a different bone structure. Carrying both at once would be difficult, but leaving either behind was not an option. Humans did not abandon the helpless, not when there was a chance to save them. He adjusted his grip and began the slow march back toward a rocky outcrop he had noticed earlier, where he hoped to find shelter. The wind pushed against him, trying to force him back, but he pushed harder. His boots crunched through the deep snow, step by heavy step. The women stirred faintly in his arms, their breaths shallow but still present. Aron kept moving, his mind focused on one goal: get them to safety before the cold took them. After what felt like an eternity, he reached the dark rocks and found a narrow opening between them. Inside, the space widened into a shallow cave. It was not perfect shelter, but it was better than the open plain. He lowered the women gently onto the ground and quickly set up his portable heater. The small device hummed to life, spreading a faint glow of warmth into the cold air. He checked on them again. Their lips had lost some of the blue tint, and their trembling slowed as the warmth reached them. Aron carefully removed the frost from their clothing and wrapped them tighter in the thermal blankets. He offered them water from his canteen, and though their hands were weak, they managed to sip slowly. The two women looked at him with wide eyes, their expressions a mix of fear, confusion, and something else, perhaps hope. Aron gave a reassuring nod and spoke again, slowly and clearly. "Safe. Warm." He pointed at the heater, then at them. "Safe." One of them, her voice barely audible, whispered a word that sounded like Lyra. She tapped her chest weakly when she said it. The other followed, whispering a softer sound, "Nara." She too pointed to herself. Aron understood. Names. He gave a small smile and nodded. "Lyra." Nara. Then he touched his own chest. Aron. Their eyes softened at that. Despite the storm outside, despite the vast distance between their worlds and languages, a bridge had begun to form in that cave. Aron had found 2 lives on the edge of being lost, and now those lives depended on him. He fed the heater more fuel, knowing it would not last forever. The night would be long, and the storm outside showed no sign of stopping. But he was human, and humans did not give up easily. Looking at the 2 alien women wrapped in blankets, shivering less with each passing moment, Aron made a silent promise. He would not let them die here. The icy wind screamed outside the cave, but inside, a fragile light of survival had been lit. For Aron, the discovery of Lyra and Nara was not only a test of endurance but the beginning of something far greater than he could yet imagine. The storm outside did not rest. Snow piled against the entrance of the cave, and the wind roared like a living creature. Aron sat near the heater, watching the 2 alien women wrapped tightly in his blankets. Their breathing had grown steadier, though their bodies still showed signs of weakness. For a long while, Aron simply observed them. Their skin was smooth but patterned with faint markings that almost looked like natural tattoos. When the heater's light flickered across their faces, the markings seemed to glow faintly, as if their bodies carried hidden energy. Aron did not understand it, but he knew enough about survival to focus on what mattered, keeping them alive. He melted snow in a small pot over the heater and mixed it with nutrient powder from his supplies. The simple meal would not taste good, but it would restore strength. When it was ready, he crouched beside the women and spoke softly. Food. Eat. He demonstrated by lifting a spoonful and tasting it first. Lyra, the one who had spoken her name earlier, looked at him with tired eyes. She hesitated, then slowly accepted the spoon. Her lips trembled, but she swallowed. Nara followed after, weaker still, but she managed a few sips. Aron felt a sense of relief. If they could eat and drink, their chances of survival were rising. The women tried to speak to him, their voices fragile and melodic. He shook his head gently, showing that he did not understand. Still, they continued, pointing at objects around the cave and repeating words in their language. Aron realized they were trying to teach him. He admired their willpower. Even in such a state, they were reaching out to connect. Aron decided to do the same. He pointed at the heater. Heat. Then at the pot. Food. Then at himself. Aron. He repeated each word slowly, with a calm tone. The women exchanged glances, then attempted to mimic his sounds. Their voices stumbled over the unfamiliar syllables, but they were learning. Lyra managed to say Ron, and Nara whispered food with effort. He smiled at their attempts. Language was a wall, but with patience, walls could be broken. Time passed, and the warmth of the cave made the women more alert. Lyra sat up first, wrapping the blanket tightly around her shoulders. She studied Aron carefully, as though trying to measure what kind of being he was. Nara remained lying down, too weak to rise, but her eyes followed every movement. Aron noticed the way their gaze lingered on his hands when he worked. Perhaps they were curious about human strength, or perhaps they wondered why a stranger would care for them at all. Aron did not think much about it. For him, the choice was simple. If someone was in danger, you helped. That was what it meant to be human. Later, as night fell, Aron adjusted the heater to conserve power. The cave grew darker, lit only by the faint glow of the device and the shimmer of snow at the entrance. The women huddled closer to the warmth, and Aron placed his own coat over them to add more insulation. He could endure the cold better than they could. As he sat against the stone wall, his thoughts drifted. He wondered what world they came from, what people they belonged to, and how they had ended up stranded here. Their shipwreck was somewhere out in the storm, but in this weather, searching would be near impossible. For now, Survival inside this cave was their only path. Suddenly, Lyra made a sound to catch his attention. She pointed at herself. Lyra. Then at her companion. Nara. Finally, she pointed at him. Aron. Aron nodded with understanding. Yes. Lyra. Nara. Aron. Nara gave the faintest of smiles, her lips curving just slightly. It was the first time Aron had seen either of them show warmth beyond survival. He felt something stir inside him. They were not just strangers. They were becoming something more, companions in hardship. The long night wore on. Aron kept watch while the women slept. From time to time, he fed the heater more fuel and listened to the storm outside. The sound was wild and unforgiving, a reminder that nature cared nothing for the lives caught within it. Yet inside the cave, three beings from different worlds shared the same fragile hope. When morning arrived, the storm finally softened. Pale light filtered through the snow at the entrance. Aron stepped outside briefly, scanning the white horizon. The land stretched endlessly, and somewhere beneath that snow lay the wreck of the women's ship. He returned inside quickly to conserve energy. The women were awake now. Lyra was stronger, able to sit upright without shaking. Nara was slower to recover, but she too seemed more stable than before. Aron prepared another simple meal, and this time they ate with more strength. Afterward, Lyra tried to communicate again. She drew lines in the snow on the cave floor, shapes that seemed to represent stars or planets. She pointed from one to another, then tapped her chest. Aron understood the meaning. She was trying to tell him where she and Nara had come from. He wished he could respond, but his own knowledge of the galaxy was limited, and without proper maps, her symbols remained a mystery. Still, he appreciated the effort. They were building trust, piece by piece. At one point, Lyra reached out and touched his hand gently, her eyes steady on his. She spoke a word in her language that he did not know, but the tone was clear. It was gratitude. Nara, still weak but watching closely, whispered a softer sound that carried the same feeling. Aron simply nodded. Words were not always needed. Actions spoke louder, and his actions had made the difference between life and death. The day passed quietly, but not without weight. The women no longer looked at him with only fear. There was still caution in their eyes, yet also growing respect. Aron could sense it. He had taken responsibility for them, and they were beginning to accept it. That night, as the cave grew cold again, the three of them sat close to the heater. Aron thought about his damaged ship and the repairs it needed. He thought about the two women and how their survival now rested in his hands. A strange thought came to him: maybe fate had placed them together for a reason. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. The snow could bury them, or the storm could return. Yet one thing was certain. Aron would not allow them to face it alone. The days that followed tested Aron's endurance and patience. The storm outside weakened at last, but the land remained a frozen wasteland. The cave was no longer just a temporary shelter. It had become a small home, a place where survival depended on cooperation. Aron rose early each day, leaving the safety of the cave to search for anything useful. He gathered frozen branches and chunks of hard ice from the rocky ridges. He checked his survival pack again and again, counting the fuel cells, food rations, and emergency tools he still had. He knew that if he wasted supplies, the three of them would not last long. Lyra and Nara slowly regained their strength. They still looked fragile compared to him, but their eyes had grown sharper, and their movements less shaky. They often watched him work with silent attention, their gazes following the way he used his tools or how he built small fires. Aron realized they had little understanding of survival skills. Perhaps on their own world, technology provided for every need. On this frozen planet, however, such knowledge was useless without the basics. One evening, as Aron lit a small fire with dried grass and a flint, he noticed Lyra leaning closer. She studied the sparks with wide eyes, then reached out as if to touch the flame. Aron quickly shook his head and gently stopped her hand. Hot. Burn, he said firmly, pointing at the fire. Lyra tilted her head, repeating the sound carefully. Hot. Then she smiled, as though proud of learning a new word. Nara, still wrapped in her blanket, whispered the same word softly. Aron decided it was time to teach them more. He picked up a stick, handed it to Lyra, and demonstrated how to hold it near the fire to warm it without burning it. She copied him carefully, her expression serious, then let out a soft laugh when the stick smoked slightly. Nara watched from her place, her eyes bright despite her quiet nature. The lessons continued over the next days. Aron showed them how to melt snow for drinking water, how to arrange stones around the fire to keep the heat longer, and how to listen for the sound of cracking ice to avoid dangerous ground. They learned slowly, but each small success filled the cave with a sense of progress. One morning, Aron prepared to hunt for food. His supplies were running low, and he could not rely only on ration packs forever. Using a makeshift spear crafted from metal scraps and wood, he set out into the snow. To his surprise, Lyra insisted on following him. She pointed at herself, then at him, repeating firmly, "Help." Aron hesitated, but in the end, he allowed her to come. Together, they walked across the frozen plain, their breath rising in white clouds. Lyra stumbled at first, unused to the heavy snow, but she refused to give up. Aron slowed his pace so she could keep up. They tracked small creatures that scurried beneath the snow for warmth. Aron moved quietly, signaling Lyra to remain still. When the moment came, he struck quickly, his spear piercing the icy crust. He lifted out a struggling creature that resembled a snow hare, its body adapted to the cold. Lyra gasped in amazement. She had never seen hunting done this way. Aron showed her how to hold the creature carefully, then explained with gestures that it would provide food and warmth. She nodded with understanding, though her expression carried both respect and sorrow for the act. Together, they returned to the cave, where Nara waited anxiously. That night, they cooked the snow hare over the fire. The smell filled the cave, rich and warm, far better than the dry rations. Aron gave the first pieces to Lyra and Nara. They ate cautiously at first, then with more energy as the taste revived them. For the first time since he had found them, Aron saw true life in their eyes. As the fire burned low, Lyra tapped her chest and said slowly, "Lyra's strong." She pointed at Nara. "Nara strong." Then she pointed at Aron and spoke with more weight. "Aron, strong human." Nara nodded in agreement, her voice soft but clear. "Strong human." Aron felt a strange warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. To them, his skills were more than survival tricks. They were proof of resilience, proof that humans had a will that could endure even the harshest world. In the days that followed, their bond grew deeper. Lyra began helping him gather wood and stones, learning to recognize safe paths across the ice. Nara, though still weaker, contributed by preparing the fire and keeping the cave organized. Aron taught them words each evening, pointing at objects and naming them. They repeated after him, sometimes failing, sometimes laughing, but always learning. One night, when the wind outside was calm, Aron told them about Earth. He pointed at the stars visible through a crack in the cave roof and spoke slowly. "Home. Earth. Blue world. Many people." His words were simple, but his tone carried meaning. Lyra and Nara listened intently, their eyes wide with curiosity. They spoke softly in their own language, pointing at the stars as if trying to tell him of their own home. Though they did not understand each other fully, something deeper passed between them. They were no longer strangers trapped by chance. They were partners in survival, bound by trust. Aron knew the challenges ahead were still great. His ship remained broken, Their supplies were limited, and the frozen world showed no mercy. Yet when he looked at Lyra and Nara, he no longer felt the weight of the struggle pressing only on his shoulders. They were learning. They were adapting. And together, they were becoming stronger. For Aron, this was more than survival. It was proof of what it meant to be human, to share strength, to teach, and to protect. The two alien women had come to rely on him, but slowly, they were also becoming capable of standing beside him. As the fire flickered against the cave walls, Aron sat quietly, watching them rest. A sense of calm filled him. Tomorrow would bring new hardships, but tonight, in this small circle of warmth, there was something rare on such a harsh world. There was hope. The days in the cave turned into weeks, and though the frozen world remained harsh, life inside their small shelter had become steadier. Aron, Lyra, and Nara no longer acted as strangers. They moved like a small unit, each contributing in their own way. Aron taught, and the women learned, but they also gave him something in return, a sense of companionship that eased the loneliness of survival. One morning, after the storm clouds finally broke, the three stepped out into the bright sunlight. The snow stretched endlessly, glittering under the pale sun. Aron scanned the horizon carefully. He had studied the landscape many times before, but this time, something caught his eye. In the distance, half buried beneath a ridge of ice, was a dark shape that did not belong to the natural land. He narrowed his eyes, then pointed. Ship. Lyra and Nara followed his gaze. At once their faces changed. Their eyes widened, and their steps quickened, though they were still weak from the long weeks of cold. They exchanged words in their language, their voices urgent and filled with emotion. Aron did not need translation. He knew at once it was their vessel. The walk to the wreck was difficult. Snow crunched under their boots, and the icy wind bit at their faces. Yet the women pressed forward with new determination. When they reached the site, Aron finally saw it clearly. The ship was small, perhaps meant for scouting or short travel. Its hull was split open, scarred by fire and impact. Jagged metal jutted from the ice, and smoke stains still marked the surface, though the fire had long died. Lyra placed her hand gently against the broken metal, her face filled with sorrow. Nara crouched low, touching the snow near the wreck, her eyes glistening. Aron stood behind them, silent. He understood what they felt. This ship had carried them across the stars, and now it was nothing but twisted debris. Aron stepped forward and examined the damage. He knew ships well enough to see the truth. The vessel would never fly again. The main engine was destroyed, and most of the internal systems had frozen solid. Still, he climbed inside carefully, searching for anything useful. Lyra and Nara followed, though their movements were slow with grief. Inside, the air was colder than the outside wind. Snow had crept through the cracks, covering the floor in white layers. Broken panels sparked faintly before dying again. Aron moved through the wreckage with caution. He pulled open compartments, checked storage units, and gathered whatever supplies had survived the crash. He found small containers of dried food, a half-functioning power cell, and tools that were strange in design but still sharp and sturdy. These were treasures for survival. When he returned to the entrance of the wreck, he laid the items out. Food. Power. Tools, he said slowly, pointing at each. Lyra and Nara knelt beside him, their eyes wet but their faces calmer now. They touched the items, speaking softly in their language. Then Lyra looked at him and repeated his words. Food. Power. Tools. Aron gave a small nod. They were learning quickly. The three of them carried what they could back to the cave. It took several trips, but by the end of the day, their shelter was filled with new supplies. The women seemed lighter in spirit, as though seeing their ship had given them closure. Though the wreck could not carry them home, it had given them what they needed to keep living. That night, the cave was warmer than ever. Using parts of the power cell, Aron boosted the heater's strength. The small fire crackled, and the glow reflected in their eyes. The women ate better than they had in weeks, and their laughter, soft but genuine, echoed against the stone walls. Aron listened quietly. It was rare, yet beautiful. After the meal, Lyra began to draw again in the snow on the cave floor. This time her drawings were clearer. She sketched stars, then a larger circle that represented a planet. She pointed to it, then to herself and Nara. Aron understood. That was their home. She added more shapes, perhaps other worlds or systems. Then she pointed at him and waited. Aron thought carefully, then bent down and drew his own circle with a smaller one beside it. He pointed at the larger circle. Earth. Then at the smaller one. Moon. Lyra and Nara repeated the words softly, their voices gentle. Their faces glowed with curiosity. They touched his drawing as if it were a precious secret he had shared. For a moment, the cold world outside seemed far away. As days passed, the bond between them deepened. Lyra often joined Aron in gathering supplies, her determination strong. She was bold, quick to learn, and often laughed when she succeeded at something new. Nara, though quieter, grew closer in her own way. She stayed in the cave to prepare food and watch the fire, but when Aron returned from his searches, she always greeted him with a warm smile. One evening, as the firelight flickered across the walls, both women sat beside him. They spoke softly, using the few human words they had learned mixed with their own language. Aron could not understand everything, but he felt the meaning behind their voices. They trusted him, admired him, and depended on him. He had become more than a stranger to them. Aron lay back against the stone wall and stared at the cave ceiling. He thought about the moment he had first found them in the snow, frozen and helpless. Now they sat alive and strong beside him, their bond unshakable. The frozen world outside was still deadly, but inside the cave, something new had grown. It was not only survival anymore. It was connection. Aron closed his eyes, listening to their soft voices. He did not know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He would not abandon them. They were no longer just two alien women in need of help. They were companions. They were family in the making. The frozen world outside remained cruel, but inside the cave, warmth and life had returned. The fire crackled, the heater hummed softly, and for the first time in many weeks, there was a sense of comfort. Aron sat near the fire, sharpening one of the alien tools he had salvaged from the wreck. The metal was strong, sharper than human steel, and with it he had crafted a blade that could cut through the thick hides of snow creatures. Lyra and Nara sat nearby, speaking softly in their own language. Their voices carried a rhythm, like a song of whispers that blended with the sound of the flames. Aron could not understand the words, but he could feel the meaning. Their tone was filled with warmth and affection. From time to time, they looked at him, and their eyes carried an emotion that made him shift uneasily. Aron had faced storms, hunger, and loneliness, yet this was different. He felt their trust, their admiration, and something deeper that grew each day. He had saved them, yes, but now it seemed they wanted more than safety. They wanted him. That evening, after their meal, Lyra moved closer. She sat beside him and touched his arm gently. Her eyes glowed in the firelight, and her expression was serious. She spoke slowly, mixing a few human words with her own language. Aron, strong, good. She placed her hand over her chest, then said firmly, Lyra heart. Aron. Aron froze. He understood enough to know what she meant. His heart beat heavily in his chest. Before he could respond, Nara also moved forward. Her steps were slower, her voice softer, but her eyes were steady. She touched his other arm and whispered. Aron, kind, life. She placed her hand over her chest just as Lyra had done. Nara hard. Aron. The fire crackled between them, but Aron barely noticed. His breath caught as he looked from one to the other. Both women, different in spirit yet equal in devotion, had chosen him. Aron leaned back, unsure of what to say. He was a human stranded on a frozen planet, trying only to survive. Yet now two lives looked at him as more than a savior. They looked at him as the one they wanted to share their future with. Lyra waited, her eyes fierce and determined. Nara waited too, her gaze softer but no less true. Aron ran a hand over his face. He had always believed that survival left no room for such feelings. Yet here they were, alive because of him, and offering something beyond gratitude. He felt the weight of their choice pressing on him. The night grew quiet as the three sat together. Aron finally spoke, his voice low. I care for you both. But this world is dangerous. My ship is broken. I do not even know if I will leave this place alive. He paused, looking at them in turn. Why would you choose me? Lyra answered first, her voice strong. She pointed at him. You fight storm. You save life. You teach. Strong human. Heart strong. Nara added softly, you share fire. You give food. You stay. Her eyes glistened, and her voice carried gentle truth. No fear. Their words struck him deeply. He had thought of himself as simply doing what was right, but to them, it was something greater. To them, he was not just a man. He was hope. Aron leaned back and stared at the cave roof. He felt torn. On one side sat Lyra, bold and full of fire. On the other sat Nara, gentle and calm as the snow outside. Both had risked their hearts for him, and both had given him a reason to keep fighting each day. He could not choose lightly. The following days were filled with quiet tension. Lyra often stayed close to him, helping with every task, proving her strength and will. Nara, though quieter, was no less present. She cared for him in silence, keeping the cave in order, preparing food, and watching him with eyes that spoke more than words ever could. Aron felt pulled between them. Each glance, each small smile, carried weight. Yet he also knew survival came first. If they allowed their hearts to distract them, all three could perish in the frozen wasteland. He struggled with the choice, but he could not ignore the truth both women had become part of him. One evening, as the sky outside turned red with the setting sun, Aron stepped outside to clear his thoughts. The wind was calmer, and the snow reflected the fading light like fire on ice. He stood silently, breathing deeply, when he heard footsteps behind him. It was Lyra. She came to his side and looked out at the endless white. After a long silence, she said softly, together, strong. She touched his arm, her gaze steady. Not leave. A moment later, Nara appeared. She did not speak at first. She simply stood beside them, her presence quiet but firm. When she finally spoke, her words were simple. 3, 1. She looked at Aron, then at Lyra, and nodded gently. Aron understood then. This was not about choosing one and leaving the other behind. This was about unity. They had survived together, suffered together, and grown together. Their hearts were not rivals. Their hearts were a bond that tied the three of them. He turned to face them both. His voice was steady now. If we stay together, we must fight together. The storms, the hunger, the danger. I cannot promise an easy life. But I promise I will not leave either of you. Lyra smiled fiercely, her eyes shining. Nara smiled softly, her face glowing with peace. They both reached out, placing their hands on his. For the first time, Aron felt complete. The frozen world outside was merciless, but inside the cave, something powerful had formed. It was not only survival anymore. It was a bond of hearts. That night, as the fire burned low, the three sat close together. No words were needed. Their silence carried trust, strength, and a promise that would carry them into whatever came next. The days after the quiet confession of hearts were calm, but Aron knew peace on a frozen world never lasted long. He watched the horizon each morning and evening, studying the sky with careful eyes. The weather here could turn without warning. The calm air and clear skies often hid the promise of another storm waiting to strike. Inside the cave, life was steady. Lyra trained herself to help Aron with hunting. She grew quicker and stronger, no longer stumbling in the deep snow as often. Her bold spirit pushed her to prove herself. Nara, though less eager to fight the outside world, showed her own strength inside the cave. She had learned to use the alien tools they had recovered from the wreck, and with them she repaired broken pieces of equipment. Both women were becoming more than survivors. They were becoming partners. Then came the night when the world reminded them of its power. The air outside shifted, carrying a low rumble that shook the ground. Aron felt it first, the deep vibration through the rocks beneath his boots. He stepped outside, and what he saw chilled him more than the wind ever could. Dark clouds rolled over the horizon, thick and heavy. The wind screamed across the plain, carrying snow in violent waves. It was not just a storm. It was the kind that could bury caves, crush weak shelters, and freeze any life left exposed. Aron hurried back inside. "Storm," he said firmly. He pointed to the cave walls and shook his head. "Not safe." "Strong storm." Lyra and Nara understood the tone, even if not all the words. Their eyes filled with fear, but also determination. They rose at once, ready to follow his lead. Aron set to work quickly. He checked the heater, the fire, and the supplies. Then he turned to the entrance. The storm would push snow into the cave until it collapsed under the weight. They needed to reinforce it. "Help," Aron said, pointing to the rocks and then to the entrance. Lyra grabbed one of the alien tools and began moving heavy stones. Nara followed, her movements slower but precise. Together, they carried rock after rock to the opening, building a wall against the storm. Aron worked beside them, using his strength to lift the heaviest pieces. The storm struck before they were finished. The wind roared through the gaps, throwing snow into their faces and cutting their skin with icy blades. Aron shouted over the noise. "Faster!" Lyra gritted her teeth, pushing with all her strength. Nara stumbled once, nearly falling, but Aron caught her and steadied her. They pressed on, filling the gaps with rocks and snow packed tight to form a barrier. The storm howled louder, shaking the very walls of the cave. Hours passed in a blur of struggle. The fire inside flickered weakly, threatened by the cold wind that seeped through the smallest cracks. Aron, Lyra, and Nara worked without rest, their bodies aching, their breaths heavy. Yet not one of them gave up. At last, the entrance was sealed. The storm raged outside, but inside, the wall held firm. Aron sank against the stone, his chest heaving. Lyra dropped beside him, her face flushed but her eyes burning with triumph. Nara crouched near the fire, feeding it carefully with fuel. The three of them had done it together. But the trial was not over. The storm lasted through the night and into the next day. The cave grew colder, despite the fire and heater. Food was limited, and they could not leave until the storm ended. The weight of the snow pressed down above them, making the cave groan. At one point, a loud crack echoed from the roof. Snow and small stones fell onto the floor. Lyra gasped, rushing to hold up a weak section of wall. Aron leapt to her side, pushing against the falling stones with all his strength. Nara brought more rocks and snow to pack the gap, her hands shaking from the cold, but her will steady. Together, they reinforced the roof, their arms straining as the storm pressed harder. Aron could feel his muscles burn, but he refused to let go. Lyra pressed beside him, her determination as fierce as his. Nara worked with quiet focus, sealing the weak spots. When at last the wall held firm again, they collapsed near the fire, exhausted. Their breaths came in gasps, their bodies shaking from the effort. Yet in their eyes shone something powerful: victory. The storm continued for 3 days. They lived in darkness, with only the fire and the faint glow of the alien heater to keep them alive. Aron rationed the food carefully, sharing equal portions with Lyra and Nara. He ate less himself to give them more, but they noticed. Lyra tried to push her portion back to him, but Aron shook his head firmly. "You need it more." Nara, her voice soft but steady, whispered, "Aron's strong. But not alone." She pressed the food back into his hand, her eyes full of quiet strength. Lyra nodded, echoing the same. For the first time, they were not only being saved by him. They were saving him too. When the storm finally ended, silence fell across the land. Aron pushed away the rocks and snow blocking the entrance. Light streamed into the cave, bright and blinding after days of darkness. The frozen plain stretched endlessly, but now it was covered in fresh snow, smooth and untouched. The three of them stepped outside together. The air was sharp and clean, the sky a pale blue. The storm had tested them harder than anything before, but they had endured. Aron looked at Lyra and Nara. Their faces were tired, their bodies thin, but their eyes shone with pride. They had fought the storm as one. He realized that their bond was no longer built on him alone. It was built on shared struggle, shared pain, and shared victory. He spoke softly, pointing to them both. "Together. Strong." Lyra smiled fiercely. "Together strong." Nara echoed the words, her voice calm but sure. "Together strong." In that moment, Aron knew the truth. This frozen world had tried to break them, but it had only made them stronger. The storm had been a trial, and they had passed it not as 3 separate lives, but as one. The future still held danger. The ship was broken, and their supplies would not last forever. But Aron no longer felt the weight of survival pressing on his shoulders alone. He had allies, partners, and hearts bound to his. For the first time since he had landed on this world, he believed not just in survival, but in a future worth fighting for. The storm was gone, but its memory stayed in their bones. The sky stretched clear and wide above them, bright and endless. Aron stood outside the cave with Lyra and Nara at his side. The world looked new, as if the storm had washed it clean. The snow sparkled in the sunlight, untouched and pure. But Aron knew the danger was not over. The food would not last forever. The heater was working, but fuel was limited. They had survived the storm, but now they had to think about the future. He turned to the wreck of the alien ship lying half buried in snow. It had been broken from the day he found it, but pieces of it still worked. Nara had learned more each day about its systems. She was patient, her hands careful as she tested wires and crystals that pulsed with strange light. Lyra was less patient, but her strength made her useful for lifting and moving heavy parts. Aron provided direction, and together they had already repaired smaller tools. Now they needed something greater. A signal. If they could repair the communication array, they could send a call into the stars. Perhaps someone would hear. Perhaps help would come. Nara worked for hours, her brow furrowed as she studied the alien circuits. Aron handed her tools when she asked, his rough hands steady beside her delicate touch. Lyra stood nearby, shielding them from the cold wind with large pieces of broken hull that she set up as barriers. At last, Nara looked up, her eyes shining. "Signal, maybe." She pointed to the cracked array. "Need power. Need sky." Aron understood. They had to bring the array out of the wreck, up to the open ground, and give it power. He and Lyra lifted the broken frame while Nara guided them. The device was heavy, the metal cold against their hands, but they carried it slowly out into the open plain. They set it up on a high ridge where the sky was wide. Snow crunched under their boots as they worked. Aron tied the frame in place with rope from his own survival kit. Nara connected glowing cables to a power core she had rebuilt. The array sparked weakly at first. A small light blinked and faded. Nara's lips pressed tight. Aron saw her frustration. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Try again. You can do it." Her eyes softened at his steady voice. She adjusted the connections, and the array lit once more. This time the light stayed. A low hum filled the air. The signal was alive. Nara began pressing sequences on a cracked panel. The strange language of her people glowed across the screen. She muttered softly, her voice almost a chant. Aron and Lyra stood behind her, watching, waiting. Finally she looked up. "Signal sent. Into sky. Maybe far." Her voice trembled, but her eyes held hope. Aron let out a slow breath. It was the first real chance they had. A chance not only to survive, but to be found. Days passed. The signal repeated every hour, pulsing into the sky like a heartbeat. They waited, watching the horizon for any sign of response. During that time, their bond grew deeper. Lyra trained daily, hunting with Aron, learning his ways with bow and spear. She laughed when she succeeded, proud of her progress. Nara grew closer to Aron in quieter moments, sitting with him near the fire as she explained pieces of her language. She taught him words slowly, her voice calm and soft. Aron repeated them with care, and each time she smiled faintly. The three of them were no longer strangers. They were something stronger, something unbreakable. On the fourth day, as dawn broke, Aron saw something in the sky. A light. At first he thought it was a star, but it moved. It grew brighter, larger, until it cut across the sky like fire. "Look," Aron whispered. Lyra gasped. Nara's eyes filled with tears. The light descended, growing into the shape of a ship. It was smaller than the broken wreck they had found, but whole and alive. Engines flared as it slowed above the plain. Snow blew across the ground as it landed. The three of them ran to the ridge, their hearts racing. The ship opened with a hiss, and figures stepped out. They were not human. They were of Nara and Lyra's kind, their skin shining faintly in the light. Nara cried out words in her own tongue, her voice filled with emotion. The strangers answered, rushing forward. Two of them embraced her and Lyra. It was clear they knew each other's people. Aron stood back, watching quietly. Relief and pride swelled in his chest. He had kept them alive long enough for this moment. Then Nara turned to him. She took his hand firmly. Lyra came to his other side and did the same. They looked at the rescuers, then back to Aron. "Aron, not stay," Lyra said firmly. Her words were broken but her meaning was clear. "We together." Nara nodded. "Together. New life." The rescuers looked at Aron with curiosity. They spoke in their own tongue, asking questions. Nara answered for him, her voice strong. She pointed to him and said words filled with pride. Lyra added her own, her tone fierce. The rescuers nodded slowly. They gestured toward the ship, welcoming them all. Aron felt the weight of the frozen world lifting from his shoulders. He looked once more at the cave that had been their home, at the snow that had tried to bury them, at the sky that had seemed so empty. Then he looked at Nara and Lyra, their hands warm in his. He smiled. For the first time since he had crashed, he felt not only hope but belonging. They boarded the ship together. As it lifted into the sky, Aron looked down at the frozen land growing smaller beneath them. It had been a place of trials, of storms, of struggle. But it had also been the place where three lives came together, bound by survival and trust. Now, they were leaving not as broken survivors, but as something stronger. A human and two alien women who had chosen to walk the future side by side. Aron spoke softly, his voice steady and sure. Together strong. Lyra squeezed his hand. Together strong. Nara echoed, her voice filled with warmth. Together strong. The ship soared higher, leaving the frozen world behind. Ahead lay the stars, wide and endless, carrying with them the promise of a new beginning.